Here's the big one. What is creativity?
It's the individual psychological mechanism that allows for cultural evolution. Everyone knows intuitively that human culture changes. And so how does it change? Well, somebody has to take a risk on something new, and then it has to work, and other people will imitate them, and the change spreads through the population. So that person who came up with the new thing, tried it out and shared it, that's creativity.
And it's something they embark on completely by themselves in the beginning because there is no validation in the beginning. There's no acceptance. Till they really master all the dimensions and they're fully ready to present. That's the time when it's the ta-da moment. The journey is very lonely.
High creative adults, especially in the arts, is almost like someone who sacrifices themselves for the greater good. Like they're willing to go off the map, find something new and bring it back for the rest of us. Creativity requires embracing a risk. You have to take a risk to be creative. And I think when people have a lot, you become naturally risk averse. You don't want to risk it. Many of us are kind of stuck imitating. And I like to think that in my psychology work, that's the area of my life where I never need to imitate. I hope that everybody can have one area of their life that they don't imitate.
If you could hand every practitioner in our audience one practical habit about how original ideas actually form, what would that be?
The tip that I say is to work on your craft every single day. I don't think there's any other shortcut.
My guest today is Dennis Dumas, Associate Professor at the University of Georgia and one of the leading researchers in the scientific study of creativity. Trained in educational psychology, psychometrics, and statistics, Dennis has built his career around one of the field's most important challenges: understanding what creativity is and how we can measure it accurately. His research focuses on creativity, intelligence, giftedness, and learning, and he's particularly known for developing innovative methods for measuring creativity using psychometrics, natural language processing, text mining, and machine learning. Dennis has published extensively in leading psychology and educational journals, and his contributions to the field have been recognized with the 2024 Young Investigator Award from the Society for the Neuroscience of Creativity and the 2023 Berlin Award from the American Psychological Association for outstanding early career research in creativity. In today's conversation, we explore Dennis's path into creativity research, common misconceptions about creativity, the relationship between creativity and intelligence, and what modern measurement techniques can reveal about how creative thinking actually works. We also discuss how new computational approaches and artificial intelligence are transforming creativity research and providing insights that were previously impossible to obtain. Whether you're an entrepreneur, educator, research, artist, parent, or simply interested in understanding how creativity works, this conversation offers a fascinating look at the science behind one of humanity's most valuable abilities. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Dennis. Welcome to the Creativity Dialogues. It's such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, you started as an English and education major before you ever touched a statistics model. What was the moment or the question that pulled you from reading literature toward measuring the mind?
Thanks for asking this. I actually do have a story. I do have a moment. Maybe it's a multiple moments, but I have a first one. So, like my original career goal, I was an English major, and I guess I either wanted to be maybe a world famous novelist or a high school English teacher. Wasn't sure which one. um, and I guess I was 20 years old. It was My third year of undergraduate. I guess this would have been 2008, and I was broke, really, really flat broke. I was running out of money to pay my rent. I was living at the time in West Philly, sharing a bedroom, and it was cheap. I was something like I was paying like $200 a month in rent, but it was getting to the point that I couldn't afford it, and I was scraping the bottom of the barrel. And it was 2008, so you remember it was during the big recession. Um, I applied for jobs everywhere. I wanted to be a cart boy at Trader Joe's. I wanted to be a sushi bicycle delivery person. Nobody would hire me because I was a 20-year-old with no skills besides reading books, right? And finally, out of desperation, I sort of swallowed my pride and I went and I talked to my academic advisor at the university. I was lucky to be a part of an honors program at Temple University in Philly. Is a big state university, so lots of students. But I was a part of an honors program that was a little small, and so I had an advisor that actually knew me, knew my name, and knew a little bit about my interest. And I guess I thought maybe she'll help me in my dire situation. And so I went in. I kind of went in with my hat in front of me, like, "Is there any jobs on campus you know about?" And she was like, "Well, I know you're kind of like a reading and writing type person. You're interested in education, maybe. I have a friend and colleague who is an educational psychologist that just got a big federal research grant. Have you ever heard of educational psychology? Would you want to work in it?" And I said, "I've never in my life heard of educational psychology, but yes, I really want to work in it because I needed a job." So I remember what I was wearing. I was wearing cut off jean shorts and a cut off t-shirt. And I ran across campus and I knocked on the person's door who would eventually become my mentor. And I was saying, "Well, you don't know who I am, but I want to work for you." And this is her name was Jennifer Cromley. She's actually a very successful educational psychologist, and today works at the University of Illinois. But at the time, she was at Temple, and she hired me, even though I didn't know anything. She hired me and was willing to teach me, and it was the first time in my life anyone had ever really given me a shot like that. You know, and I worked for her for 3 years, 2 years as a student, and then 1 year after. And one of the jobs I did was she was a little old school with her reading. She read things on paper and then kept them in a big filing cabinet. And so after she would print something off and she would read it like a journal article. And then she would say, "Dennis, could you file this for me?" And then if she wanted it again, I would get it for her. And I had enough time, there wasn't too much time pressure in the job. So what I did is I started reading the papers I was meant to file. I first started with the titles and then the abstracts, and then I started reading the whole darn thing. Maybe skipping some stats if I didn't understand it because I was only an undergraduate. But eventually, I read like hundreds of papers as this part of this job, and I just started to get the sense after I had read a critical mass of psychology and education research, I was like, I think I can do this. It was one of the first times that I had this sense of, I don't know, maybe self-efficacy is the word. Like, I think
Mhm.
I could really take this on. I kind of understand what what a good paper has. So I sort of came to understand the psychology paper as like an art form, and I came to appreciate it and see its beauty. And I wanted to make that type of art. Um, and a couple years later, Jennifer wrote my recommendation letter to go to Maryland to grad school where I went, which was where she had gone. And so her recommendation was very strong, and they took me in that program, even though it was a top ed psych program, and I was like some whippersnapper who didn't know a lot, right? But Jennifer had said I was highly motivated and that she thought I had potential, and she vouched for me, and Maryland took a chance on me, and I like to think they took the right chance because I was really deeply interested in making, I guess, beautiful psychology research. I really see the psychology paper as like an art form that I can appreciate and that I love to make. So,
Mm.
geez, I know that was a long story.
So, and I love this story. I might be sort of digressing and going a little off topic, but this is something that I'd love to share with the youth. That who complain that they're not sure what to do, or they're confused, or they're just kind of static, like there's no movement. And I sometimes just hearing this story, I feel that that proverb that. Necessity is the mother of invention. So when there's a need, you somehow do get led to something which could become your purpose and your direction. So I feel that just your own story offers a lot of perspective for someone who might be just feeling stuck and just not knowing what the next step should be. And I think why your story is very inspiring is when you're willing to just move and take some sort of action, you get led a certain way, the way that's meant for you. And somehow or the other, it does turn out to be the right way.
Yeah,
So
I guess
I
you have to
I
kind of
love
make
that
it the
story.
right way.
You have to. You
Yeah.
Of course you have to. I mean, you've just got to engage. But I think most people avoid that first step completely, and so they miss out on the possibility of obeying sort of the direction that life is leading you in. So
I guess so. Yeah, I think a lot of undergraduates kind of suffer from the paradox of choice. You
yeah,
know,
yes, yes,
especially if they have very involved parents, they might end up feeling like
yes.
they have more choice than they really know what to do with.
Exactly. They
Uh,
can't handle that.
eh,
And they just get confused and end up almost numb, like they're not able to move
but
or pick a path.
one thing that, especially seeing your questions, I've been thinking about with creativity. Of course, creativity requires embracing a risk. You have to take a risk to be
Yes.
creative.
That's
And I think when people have a lot, it's actually very wise. When you have a lot, you become naturally risk averse. You don't want to risk it.
mm,
And so at that particular moment in my life, I had very little. I actually wasn't really taking on much risk to try because I needed to do I needed to do something,
right,
right?
right, right.
So I like you said, necessity is the mother of invention. But for people who have maybe they have more, they have more chips on the table. They don't want to go all in.
Yes.
Me, I didn't
Yes.
have very many chips, so I
Yes.
went in because I had to.
Yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
not just that you went in, but you engaged with it. And you really wanted a solution. You wanted something to progress. And uh, so that worked out.
Yeah, when I look back at myself at 20, 21, 22, this is 16, I'm 38 now, so it's 18,
When you said that you were 20 you know, uh, at least well over a decade back, I feel like saying you could pass it off as a 20-year-old easily
well,
now.
thank you.
So,
I
yes.
pride myself on looking, I don't know,
I'm
but
completely,
I
completely.
I was born in 1988, so I'm 38 now. I was 20 in 2008. um, but
Some people are just blessed to be eternally young.
oh,
I
good
think you're
gracious.
one of those.
Well, now you've got me all buttered up. Um, but I look back on myself and I see somebody who was really just really looking for a mentor, somebody who would believe in me, someone who would open a door at least just a crack, you know. Yeah, of course, like anybody, I think I can think like, what would life have been like if a door opened in another direction,
Yeah,
you know? But say la vie, right? That was the door that opened, and I'm proud of what I've been able to build or the way I've been able to move through it, and
yeah,
I never look back. So it's been since then, I've never done anything else. It's been
yeah,
education and ed psych research only since then.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and so that's how I guess I am in kind of a bit of a maybe not unique but relatively rare situation to be not yet 40. Hopefully, like you said, still look pretty young and to be almost 20 years into the career.
yes, yes.
So it's it is kind of a little bit of a rare position because many people come to education research later, um, and that's very common. But I'm one of those who just jumped in with both feet a little early.
Yeah. And I think always that whether we recognize it or not, there's something within us, those who are really ready to push forward. And it sounds like that's what your case is, that you were ready. So, uh,
I would say I was hungry.
yes,
I don't
yes.
know if I was
And
ready.
and yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, actually. That's a far better word. Hungry is really the very precise word because as you said before that we are trying to feed the kids who are already very overstuffed. They're full. They're like, just don't open my mouth. Don't overfeed me. Don't give me anything else.
So
And
they start
and
suffering from ennui, like,
it's yeah.
life is so full of beautiful things. How I just can't appreciate it anymore.
Exactly, exactly.
You
It's
know?
that's the other side. That's the misfortune of having so much. So
Yeah, I guess I now I've been able to build up some privilege over the course of my life. I think I'm just starting to get to experience a little ennui once in a while, and I find it
yeah,
quite beautiful. I mean, I'm really
yeah,
enjoying it
yeah,
so far,
yeah.
but I still have many
And it's
decades yet to
yeah,
live.
and you know it's so nice when it's self-made through your own accomplishments.
Yeah, and
Then that's so well deserved, and and then that helps you to grow. Unlike in the other case when you're just getting it for free, it tends to numb you. So that's the good thing.
yeah, I suppose I was always taught this as a kid, and I never believed it. But everything balances in life. I suppose
Mm,
um, everything comes with its opposite, and I guess I have found that to
yes.
be true. you know.
Yeah, yeah. So many people come to creativity research because they want to be more creative themselves. Was this true for you?
Um, well, I'm not sure. I think I wanted the opportunity to be creative. Academia offered me the chance to make a living by writing without having to take on. Academia is still kind of a risky career, but
Mm,
it's not nearly as risky as choosing to be like a novelist or a journalist even these days. So I liked academia. I still love academia for the reason that I get to experience most of the benefits of a highly creative lifestyle, but the university subsidizes my risk. So even if a project doesn't pan out, or I don't know, I get to take a leap of faith on things, but I have like an invisible, or maybe not so invisible, safety net below me. And so academia, I found it to be an optimal balance between risk and reward in creative work.
mm,
Sure, trying to be a rock star might be more reward, but the risk was too high for me to feel safe, you know?
mm,
And so the creative path I chose was a little less risky than maybe other people's creative path. But for me, it worked for my personality. I felt I needed that maybe better structured career.
mm. Your doctoral training was heavily quantitative. What did learning to think in models and measurements change about how you see creativity itself?
Well, I see. This is a fascinating question. I think very quantitatively when I think about psychology, and the way I was trained in the structural equation modeling tradition, and in the structural equation modeling tradition, all of the psychological characteristics or constructs that we care about and that we measure are conceptualized as dimensions of a space. So in quant psych, we believe, maybe this is going to sound a little crazy, but we believe the mind is real. And we believe that the mind can be represented as a space. And everything that gets measured is a dimension that defines that space. So, like, similar to how physicists study space, literal space, like they have up, down, and side to
Hmm.
side, and they have time as a dimension. I see creativity as a dimension of psychological space. And so quantitative psychology for many decades has been built on this giant metaphor to astrophysics, to astronomy, where people are like stars. And the distance between the stars is a dimension along which the stars differ, right? And so we measure the differences between people in order to try to understand the fundamental dimensionality of our mental universe.
Mm.
And so this is why I do it. It's not really about comparing people. It's about figuring out along what do they even differ.
Mm.
We all know that people are not all the same.
Yes.
Similar to saying that all the stars are not in the exact same place.
Right.
Why? Why
Yeah.
aren't they all in the same place?
Mm-hmm.
Was there a time when they were all in the same place? Similar to asking, was there a time in our lives when we were all the same? So quantitative psychology, to me, when I really got indoctrinated, into the culture of quantitative psychology, a lot of what really spoke to me was the idea of doing not just science, but geometry of the mind.
Mm.
It's all based on geometry. So the vectors that separate two people, right? You can triangulate the people, and you can do trigonometry with those vectors, and then you can start figuring out what's the correlation between those latent dimensions. I know
I think you're leading to the next question. When you say divergent thinking, what are you communicating?
Oh, well, divergent thinking is usually considered an attribute of a person, like one psychological characteristic along which people differ. And so when you ask someone to do a divergent thinking task, for example, what you'll say is think of multiple ideas, often multiple, and you're specifically instructing the person to think of ideas that either they haven't thought of before or that other people haven't thought of or won't think of. So like when we're doing it with kids, we'll say, try to think of an idea that would surprise the other kids in your class. Because we want them to understand that we don't want them to come up with the same idea,
Right.
So that's where the word divergent comes from. It's meant to be the ideas that you come up with within yourself are meant to be different from one another. But so I'm using the word differ here multiple ways. Obviously, the ideas are different within me. I come up with different ideas, but also then eventually we find that people differ in their divergent thinking performance for one reason or another. So in like these models, divergent thinking functions as a dimension. It creates space. It creates space so that people can actually be different from one another. Similar to how if it wasn't for time, we wouldn't be able to do multiple things in our lives. That's like physics. But in psych, we have other dimensions like divergent thinking or personality or whatever it is, so that we're not all the same.
Yes.
I hope
Thank you for
making sense.
thank you for explaining, because I think that this really helps, since much of my audience isn't really from academia. So having someone who takes the effort to kind of simplify things uh, will help people to enjoy and connect with the ideas. And
Well, geez, I hope I'm explaining it okay. I know I'm not perfect.
you are absolutely,
Many
absolutely.
people are surprised to hear that like we do 5, 10, 15 dimensional geometry in psychology all the time. That's what we do. That's what structural equation modeling is. People think high dimensional geometry is just in physics or math. I mean, it is math, but it's quant psych. We do high dimensional geometry. Otherwise, none of this science could exist.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So why do I want to measure? I want to measure so that I can do high dimensional geometry and understand the shape of the human mind.
Wonderful.
That's why I measure. Of course, there's pragmatic benefits. I believe in creativity assessment as a way to help kids in schools. I really do. But my underlying intellectual orientation is toward It sounds silly, but uncovering the secrets of the universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the part
Mm-hmm.
of the universe that I'm especially interested in is the human mind. And so we debate. People have been debating for 100 years. How many dimensions does the human mind have? How different are people, and why? You know, what are the
Mm-hmm.
forces that move them through psychological space? If you started out one way and then you became another, how?
Mm-hmm.
You moved through a dimension. So there obviously must be something you moved through. But then also, what pushed you or what pulled you?
Mm-hmm.
You know? So it's like stars moving through the sky, or moving through time,
Mm-hmm.
or moving through other high dimensions that we would have a hard time visualizing. But luckily, our statistical models and the computer that runs them can do it.
Great.
That's why I measure. I hope that doesn't sound too strange, but it really is to understand. It really is to
Yeah,
understand.
yeah. No, thanks for sharing that because now a lot of it makes sense. It kind of shows that there are so many perspectives that we never even think about or consider. So,
I guess maybe I got one of those weird ones that people don't think of.
yeah, and you're fortunate and thanks for sharing that. One of your main tools is the alternate uses task, where someone names as many uses for a brick or a paper clip as they can. Walk us through what that test is really measuring and what it misses.
Well, it's been around forever, the alternate uses task. And it's really a classic. You're right that the brick and the paperclip are like the classic things. Those, I don't tend to give those prompts because, well, most people today don't see a lot of paperclips, actually.
Yeah.
The, when Guilford, right, J.P. Guilford was the first person to really make the alternate uses task big. What he was trying to do, he and his team were trying to find like objects that you could find alternate uses for, and they wanted the most common objects that everyone knew. So I think they just thought, well, everyone works with paper clips every day. But obviously that's not true anymore, and especially kids might not even know what a paperclip is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we usually give like more common or even child-friendly objects
Hmm.
these days. But essentially, what the task asks for, and there's lots of ways to do it, but you give somebody a common everyday object, like, hey, a pen works, and you usually say to them, well, I know I could use this pen to write with, you know. But what else could I do with it? Is there something else that you could think of to do? And what I really want is I want you to give me an idea that would surprise the other people you know and that other people wouldn't think of. And there could be different instructions. Like you could say, now I want you to come up with as many ideas as you can in 2 minutes, or you have as much time as you need. I only want one best idea. There's a lot of different ways to do the task, and then that can flow into the scoring. But essentially, it takes, if you were just asking for like the convergent response, the most typical response, it would be very easy, right? Like
Hmm.
if you're saying to a fourth grader, what do you do with a pencil? All fourth graders know what to do with a pencil, right?
Hmm.
Maybe in preschool, what do you do with a pencil might be an actual interesting thing. They might not
Yeah.
yet know what a pencil is. But a
Hmm.
fourth grader, they all know what to do with a pencil. So it's actually a below grade level task. But it's made difficult because now you're saying, I don't want the thing you already know. I want you to invent your own ideas. So there's no right answers, but there are better answers depending on what's more or less common in the sample, or perhaps you could use human raters to judge that kind of
Hmm.
thing. I
Yeah.
hope I answered. We have lots of different tasks that kind of follow this format. So alternate uses task is one of them, but they're all prompting participants to give multiple ideas often that are unusual. And the key to making a good one is that the typical response they already know, because then they have to inhibit. Oh, okay, I know I can't say write with the pen, because if I say write, I'm not going to get credit because that's not what they want.
So
So
do the tasks change with, I mean, to whatever age group you're working with?
they absolutely should. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. My lab always does. And usually, I mean, the truth is these tasks are made for kids. They're relative, like the way you're talking about it with a paperclip, that's really a child's task.
Yeah.
If you're testing adults, it's more appropriate to make a domain-specific alternate uses task. Like, for example, I've given psychology students an example of a psychology data set, and I've said, what could you do with this data set? Right? It's a domain-specific alternate uses task. So they have to think of an object that exists in their domain, and then they have to come up with alternate uses.
You know, it's often said that children start to lose their creativity as they grow older. I'm curious, why does that happen?
Well,
Is it the educational system that's causing the problem?
I wouldn't say they lose their creativity, but they start to understand more and more what they're risking. So, if, for example, not all kids are good at taking risks. If they feel very unsafe, they won't do it. But thank goodness we live in a society where most kids do feel pretty safe. They tend to play, and they tend to be willing to take on risk. And they know that even if they say something goofy that doesn't necessarily make sense, their parents are still going to love them, and they're still going to get food and all that. But as we become adults, we start becoming more and more risk averse.
Also, I feel that the problem is that they are generally rewarded for just giving the right answers. So it's like, did you memorize this book? And now can you give an exam on it and you know, can you answer all the questions? And so you're rewarded more for your memorizing capacity but not really for just a new idea, because the adult might not even understand that idea, may not value it, and so you get pulled down for saying something which might sound stupid to the adult, and thereby you keep thinking that I'm stupid, my ideas are never good enough. And I think that these things probably do impact the way a child starts to think with age.
I think you're absolutely right. And the way I would build on what you said is, when we reward conformity and convergence, what we're doing is we're making the risk of creativity even riskier or more expensive.
Yes.
Because they know the only way to be rewarded is to conform. So they don't feel safe to take a risk.
Yeah.
And now there's already natural changes. Like, for example, as kids enter puberty in their teenage years, they usually naturally tend to care a lot more about fitting in, and they become a lot more risk averse. So creativity is really difficult during the teenage years. But then we tend to get out of it. We tend to feel safe again as an adult, and we're willing to take risks. But we still need to think, as adults, we have to think very carefully about what we're willing to risk.
And
So I don't know if I don't think that any mental or a cognitive ability to be creative does go down. Certainly, I don't think so. In fact, I think it goes up, right? As you become more knowledgeable, your potential to make a creative contribution becomes greater. But we also become more aware of what we have to lose if we rock the boat, you know? And oftentimes, adults end up in situations where other people are relying on them. They have to hold space for others. They end up in scenarios where risk is not a good thing. Like, for example, you don't necessarily want your surgeon trying a creative new surgery technique on you that they've never tried. We might hope that surgeons are making creative new techniques, but not every day.
right.
We don't necessarily want our airplane pilot finding a creative route, you know? So as
Yes.
adults, because we take on responsibility, and especially responsibility to care for others, it takes very careful consideration of which risks are worth taking. And I think when you're 4, right, you don't have to think about that. Most risks are worth taking, right? Unless you have a parent that's telling you don't run out in the street or whatever it is. But when you're 44, let's say you're an architect, that's a quintessentially creative discipline. If you're running a firm, you might think, man, I really would love to build a building with this very interesting new shape, and I don't know whether it would work, but I'd love to try it. well, whose jobs are you risking if your firm goes under? And you know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I hope I'm making sense. I guess what I would
Totally.
say is growth and maturation and education, they don't limit creativity, but
Hmm.
life kind of naturally, as we get more responsibility and we become more risk averse, creativity gets more difficult. It
Hmm.
also becomes potentially more rewarding. But
Yes.
this is why I see balancing the risk and reward ratio of each idea to be one of the critical factors in creative adulthood.
Hmm.
And that's something that usually people learn from a mentor. It's not usually taught just as declarative knowledge in a class. You have to work closely with a mentor in order to try to figure out, okay, they had this idea, but they didn't pursue it. Why not? Or they thought this idea was the one worth doing this year. Because everybody has more ideas than they can actually do.
Hmm.
So how do you know which ones?
Yes, yes.
And what were the goals this year? Well, why did our studio decide to make this movie and not that movie? Why did our firm decide to take this contract and not that contract? That kind of thing.
So I think that here it's as we grow older, our maturity levels go high. And I think what becomes important is how intrinsically motivated, or is the gaze inward or is it outward? If the gaze is merely outward, one doesn't really understand themselves. And then there could be a lot of hidden fears, anxieties, or aspects of our own personality that we're not comfortable with. And so we might get a lot of ideas from the outside world, but we're unable to do anything with them because we haven't really figured out our internal working systems. And as you said, our ability to handle risk, uncertainty, and all those are needed. And you become more fearful of these things the older you grow. In a way, when you're young, this you don't really think about these things, and so it's easy to just express however you feel like.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. As I've grown, I've gotten more and more to lose, and I'm
Hmm.
happy about that.
Yes,
And I like the story I told in the very beginning of this conversation. That was me taking a risky leap, and
completely.
I wouldn't do that today. I already have what I do, right? So when you have more to lose, you're not going to put it all on the table like that. It would be
Mhm.
silly. Um, and so I think there is something that wisdom is associated with actually taking fewer risks as you grow. Maybe it becomes about holding space for others' creativity.
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah. For decades, the bottleneck was that having humans scoring the tests was slow, expensive, and inconsistent. You switched to AI, and you and your collaborators built Oxat, a system that uses large language models to score originality. How does this work?
Thanks for asking. Actually, I'm happy to get to talk about him because one of my close mentors at Maryland, he just died this month, um, and I really think his contribution to the automatic scoring of creativity assessment hasn't completely been lauded the way I wish it was. But his name was Kevin Dunbar, and it was really his idea in the 2000s to use a technology called latent semantic analysis to score divergent thinking tasks. There had been another educational and cognitive psychologist in the 90s named Walter Kinch. He studied reading comprehension, and he collaborated with computer scientists to set up a latent semantic analysis program that people were using for psychology analysis.
Mhm.
It made a pretty big splash, at least in my little weird pond. Um, and so Kevin saw Walter's work and he thought, okay, they're using it for reading. Like they were using it for metaphor comprehension and analogical comprehension when you read to show that the distance between the analogs would make them harder to read, harder to understand. And Kevin saw that and thought, well, that he actually did analogical reasoning. And he thought, well, that's just like a divergent thinking test. the wider the association, the more points, the higher the score should be on that dimension. And so we could use latent semantic analysis to do that quantification. And so I was just it was 2012 or something. So I was a grad student. I worked with him, and we did the first peer-reviewed paper that used LSA for divergent thinking quantification. It was actually my master's thesis, if you can believe it. And so I've been doing this for a minute. And it's been, I guess, this past 15 years, going from that type of natural language processing and then having all of these new technologies come out, everything moved really, really fast. I mostly kept up with it by collaborating with computer and information scientists. So we brought in newer and better natural language processing techniques each paper, because I was lucky to work with people in that discipline who had that specific expertise. And so all the way from Kevin's kind of spark of saying, you should try this. I wonder if it will help. And then working with other collaborators since then who had much more advanced technology that they had access to. What we've been able to do is create a system where the human ratings, they could still be in the loop, like a human could still be doing the coding, and then the agreement with the computer is of interest. But it really, in a more extreme situation, and you see people doing this in literature now, they just use the computerized scores. Mm-hmm. So this way, a person doesn't have to read and rate we have data sets with 50,000 ideas or something like that, because 500 kids give 100 responses each, and it becomes a lot. And so the humans get fatigued, they're expensive, mm-hmm. They take a long time. And I think that has been one kind of fruitful automation in our world.
Are there any cons to this? Like, these are all the pros of switching, but are there any cons? Do we lose anything in this approach?
Well, I think a lot of parents don't like it. The idea of a child's responses being quantified via AI and then a high-stakes decision being made about that child, I don't think is very popular in schools. So usually schools are using those scores in conjunction with human ratings. Mm-hmm. I guess the argument I make, and I certainly like the idea of a human, I actually would prefer if humans always did it, but they just won't. The humans that work in schools are overworked, underpaid. Creativity is not their top priority. If our test is quadruple the price of a regular math or reading test because we need a human to read and score every single form, right? A multiple choice test, they can just computerized score it. But divergent thinking tests cannot be multiple choice. So we can't score it. We have to score it somehow. So if we have to pay humans to do it, what schools will do is they just won't do it, and that is sad. But for example, I teach workshops to teachers about how to make their own divergent thinking tests, how to score divergent thinking tests so that they can avoid paying testing company fees, or they don't have to use the AI because they have their own rubric and they can do the scores. But more often than not, I think people find that, for better or worse, is one thing that they're willing to outsource. Educators often get into it because they like working with kids, not because they like scoring tests. So I get it. It's certainly not, it's certainly not perfect that you're making a decision about somebody based on just a test, for one. But even testing in general is actually just a giant compromise for efficiency. Like, if we actually knew each child in schools well, like if we were actually mentoring them, we wouldn't have to ever test because we'd
Right.
already know
Right.
what they would know, right? Like
Yeah.
my doc students who I work with every day or every other day, right? We're working together closely. I don't have to give them a test because I know exactly what they know pretty much because I'm
But this
constantly
is the
taking a look.
problem of modern living. I mean,
So sometimes we call it the validity efficiency trade-off. Like
mm,
we make compromises in order to scale up.
yeah, yeah.
So instead of everybody having nice tailored clothes that actually fit them, they
Hmm.
get mass produced clothes that are meant to fit everybody. But
Right.
then clothes are way cheaper.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. Cheaper, I mean, I meant more affordable, like as a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So then
Yeah.
more people have more clothes.
Hmm.
Now that's a silly metaphor, maybe, but that's kind of what education is. It's
Right.
taking a natural human process of teaching and
Hmm.
learning and attempting to scale it up on a pseudo industrial scale so that
Hmm.
more kids can learn more, right?
Hmm.
Otherwise, if we relied on parents or close mentors, we'd have just such severe inequality. We're
Yeah.
trying to level the playing field. It's kind of like how, gosh, I don't know if this metaphor is going to go over well, but I thought of it and I'm going to say it. It's kind of like how fast food, it's like it's for everybody, right? It's affordable,
Mm-hmm.
it's quick, it's
Yeah.
everywhere.
Hmm.
In a way, it's like a giant egalitarian thing, right? Now, it's not super high quality. So the question is, do you want a really nice steak? Well, then you're probably going to have to do it yourself at home, or you're going to have to pay a lot for a teacher that has really small class sizes.
Yeah.
Or are you willing to deal with McDonald's? And that's
Yeah.
kind of what we mostly get.
Mm.
But the thing is, McDonald's is way better than starving.
Yeah. Mhm.
Imagine a
Absolutely.
world without schools.
Yeah. Yeah.
It would be horrible.
Yes.
So I really hope I'm not being too negative. But
No, no, no. It's just stating what the reality is, and sort of making sense of things.
most unfortunately, most parents don't have enough knowledge or enough time to pass the knowledge that they do have in
Yes.
order to provide the opportunities for their children to succeed in the competitive adult world. And so schools have a really important function of leveling that playing field, trying to get more people more knowledge. It's unbelievably imperfect, but it's the best right now that we can do. And
Hmm.
I'm as just to be speaking of someone who makes a living basically criticizing it, but here I am defending it because without schools, where the heck would we be? I
Yeah.
mean, I
Yeah.
can't, I don't know where I would be for one.
Hmm. Hmm.
So schools are really a very important. They reduce variance. They make people more similar to one another,
Hmm.
and I think for most humanists, like in humanist ethics, we want people to be as similar as possible until maybe age 18, and then we're willing to have them diverge. We want equality early on in the lifespan.
Hmm.
Am I making sense? I hope I'm not sounding too
Yes.
strange.
Yes. No. 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 Of course you are. Uh, you developed an idea you call dynamic measurement, and from it, a zone of proximal creativity. What does it mean to measure someone's capacity to become more creative rather than how creative they are today?
This is my favorite question that you wrote. I love talking about dynamic measurement. The dynamic measurement project is probably my proudest work, and I think it's the most creative work I've done. Um, so the story about the very beginnings of dynamic assessment. Can I tell a quick anecdote about
Yeah,
dynamic
yeah,
assessment?
please, please do.
Dynamic assessment was created by a guy named Reuven Faurstein, and he was an Israeli educational psychologist. And it was his job. I hope I'm getting all this right. Maybe I'll oversimplify, but it's an anecdote. It was famously his job to sort child survivors of the Nazi concentration camps who moved to Israel after the war. It was his job to sort them into grade level for school because
Mhm,
obviously they weren't on the grade level that their age would suggest because of
mhm.
the trauma, the missed
Right,
instruction, all of the things.
of course.
And so he gave the educational tests of the time to kids to try and sort them. But what happened is he kept sorting them too low. So
Mm,
he wasn't putting them in the right grades. And so he came up with this process that he called dynamic assessment, or sometimes he called it learning potential assessment. And today we've got lots of different words: dynamic measurement, dynamic testing. People will call it response to intervention, or RTI, where instead of testing someone at a single time, you test them at multiple time points, and you give them opportunities for instruction in between. So you're actually watching them grow. And then you use the shape of their growth curves to calculate their score. So all the way from back to the 1800s, we've known about learning curve. That's probably one of the most famous words in ed psych. One of ed psych's biggest accomplishments, actually, it's silly, is getting learning curve into the popular vernacular, right? Everyone knows learning curve. That's ed psych, right? So we know that learning tends to happen quickly and then level off. And so dynamic measurement is you plot their growth. And you pull out the trajectories, you predict where they would level off. And you use that prediction as their score. So the kids that come in already very knowledgeable do not necessarily score highly, because they may not grow very well. But the kids who come in low could score very well because they could have the chance to grow. So it's like measuring a trajectory rather than measuring a static location.
Right.
So you can predict somebody's near future. You can predict their future a lot better if you take a video of which way they're going than if you just take a snapshot. That
Absolutely.
metaphor I make. So that's what dynamic measurement is. A very famous educational psychologist who I'm sure you've heard of, but was named Vygotsky, had a concept called the zone of proximal development. And it's very akin to Fauerstein's ideas that we should be measuring what kids can do with instruction and what they can do without, and use the difference as their score. You know?
Yes.
So we've got Vygotsky and Fauerstein. There's lots of really cool big names in ed psych that have been working on this idea for decades and decades. Me and my close collaborator Dan McNeish, we created what it was meant to be a whole psychometric framework for dynamic measurement. So it fits nonlinear growth models on multiple time point testing data. So we actually have a learning curve statistically, geometrically modeled for every single child. And it calculates where the model thinks they're going based on their growth rate. So if they're growing very rapidly, the model's going to say, oh, I think they're going to end up pretty high. But if they're growing kind of flat, the model might think, well, I'm not sure if they're going to make it that high. So it's not about where they're at, it's about how they grow. And so that's what dynamic measurement is. We've done it in lots of areas. We've done it from preschool to medical school. We've done it with the military in the U.S., specifically with the Coast Guard. We've done it, we've been doing a bunch of papers on this idea. I tried a little bit to get it to work with creativity. It's a little hard to kind of conceptualize what counts as instruction. I think we could do more. But one little idea that I had was to give them multiple affordances for the task. Like the first time, tell them to think of just useful ideas, and then give them more and more prompting to be original and see where they can go. And then kind of measure their improvement. We know that will improve. They will improve. The question is how much. You know. And then so instead of using somebody's score at one of the time points as their score, we use their growth. Their improvement is their score. And so we kind of conceptualizing learning as movement in this case, right? And we're capturing how much they move in how much time. That's like my video metaphor. And we kind of predict where they're going to go.
Yeah. So you help to kind of, even through the questioning, to expand their potential to stretch themselves, in a sense.
Well, that's how education works. The learners always do better with support. For decades, much of testing has presumed that they should not get support during the test. Right? That's the idea. You want to know.
Yeah.
And that makes sense for adults. right? You don't want somebody, you don't want a board certified physician to need their teacher there with them, right? When they take the
Right.
board exams. I already made a joke about a pilot, right? There's certain people, especially adults, that we need them to be able to do the thing on their own. But for kids, there's a lot of evidence that maybe they need to do it on their own the first time, but then observing how they can do it with support gives you
Mm.
so much more information about where they're
Mhm.
going to go. And so we were able to predict intellectual ability at age 72 way better when we did this kind of thing. So we've done it with full lifespan data sets. And it's really exciting. I find this project really, really quite cool. One of the problems is it's quite resource intensive. So schools usually only do this kind of thing. School psychologists do it, but only a very small number of kids qualify for those services because they're so expensive. To pay a psychologist to sit with a child, give them instruction, observe their performance, give them instruction, observe their performance over a whole afternoon is much more expensive than any typical test. So at this point, we're pretty much sunk with getting it used in schools. But it absolutely, definitely works better. The question is, does anyone care enough about it working better to be willing to pay for it?
Um,
And right now, unfortunately, the answer has been no. But heck, we were joking about my age. I think I got plenty of decades left to work. Maybe things are going to swing. We'll see.
yes. Yes.
We're,
I think people resist new ideas until they really start to see the value
well,
in
education is
that.
one of those tough areas because,
Mhm.
well, like for example, in most countries, and the U.S. included, there's no legal requirement for schools to use research. Like we don't
Right.
have anything like malpractice in education. Right? If you go to a hospital and they give you a medicine that is been proven to harm people, they can be sued. But you can go to a school and get curriculum that's been proven to harm students, and they can just keep doing it, and there's no consequences. Um, so that's the current situation in ed right now. It's the dark ages. You know, I have high hopes that maybe in my students' lifetime, education will be a totally different type of thing.
Mhm.
But we'll see. Maybe we got to get worse before we can get better.
Mhm.
Maybe. Uh, you know, I've
Yeah.
got high hopes, and it's especially hard when the new idea is more resource intensive. Like the
Yeah.
AI for creativity measurement, it's less resource intensive. So that's been my project that's been most widely adopted
Mhm.
because it's cheap.
Mhm.
But dynamic measurement, it's more resource intensive. Nobody's done it. The military
Mm.
did it. So we're trying. We're trying our best. The
Yeah.
other weird, it's a silly thing to say, but in education research is because kids are so resilient and they grow anyway. It's kind of tempting for people to say, "Oh well, education doesn't really
Yeah.
matter because they're going to be
Mhm.
fine." Let's put our money into gerontology where they're not going to be fine without intervention. So we need the intervention.
Mhm.
Where kids, they're gonna be fine. They're gonna survive,
Mhm.
and we don't tend to care about the counterfactual. But if they got these services, the future could be brighter.
Mhm.
You
For
know,
sure. Yeah.
as far as I can tell, nobody with the purse strings cares about that.
Mm. Well, we hope that changes.
And that doesn't necessarily mean they got to believe me. But
Yeah.
I've always heard no one's more dangerous than somebody who wants to change the world. So I'm not trying to say I know all the answers, but it would be nice to get to try some of these at scale.
Yes.
You know.
Definitely. Yeah. Now I wanted to move to, just get to hear some of your views on the nature of creativity. After all the data, here's the big one. What is creativity in your current understanding? And how has measuring it changed your answer over the years?
This is a great question. Thank you. So oftentimes we define creativity at the level of ideas, and it's but it's harder to define at the level. So, like for an idea, I think the kind of like you said, the accepting consensus definition, an idea that is original and is some kind of usefulness with its context. I think that was it's a lot more original and person. As a person, it's not useful. You know what I mean? The idea. So I've been working on this because I've just started my first book. So I did this whole first chapter of what is creativity. And the way I tried to bring it in, what is creativity at the person level, is it's the individual psychological mechanism that allows for cultural evolution. Right? We know, everyone knows intuitively that human culture changes. Culture is not the same as it was 10 years ago or 100 or 1,000 years ago. And so how does it change? Well, somebody has to take a risk on something new, and then it has to work, and other people will imitate them, and the change spreads through the population. So that person who came up with the new thing, tried it out and shared it, that's creativity. And so it's kind of like the common metaphor is between biological evolution and cultural evolution, where in the metaphor, our ideas are like our babies, and which idea survives. It's like we're like mother sea turtles laying eggs, and the ideas have to crawl to the ocean and hopefully make it through the seagulls. And if they make it and then they have kids of their own, that means you as a creator have made an impact. So creativity is about having something new and then spreading it to other people.
I think it's that spreading it part which holds people back, because that's the manifesting is the hard part, because ideas are all around us. I mean, there's so many things we can spot, but all the effort, the risk taking, the disappointments, and everything that's involved, I think that is really what gets in the way of these wonderful ideas being manifested.
Well, that's one of the, I'm sorry for interrupting you. I'm just so eager. That's one of the big truisms in the research, right? Like most ideas don't make it.
Yeah.
And creativity is risky. So it doesn't mean risky like you take a risk and then you get it and you're happy. It means risky like it's probably not going to work.
Yeah. And also that it keeps changing. So you'd think it's going in the right direction, then something happens, and then no, you need to do either a turn in the opposite direction, or you need it to move in some other way. So it's dealing with this perpetual discomfort. I think that that's what puts people off. They just want to feel relaxed and comfortable as soon as possible. But creativity will not allow that. Like, it's just from one level to the next to the next. It might just keep going a little higher, a little lesser, but you have to learn to live with that perpetual discomfort. And I think that's what people really can't handle.
There's a Paul Torrance quote. He's a legendary educational psychologist, and he worked here at Georgia, so of course I gotta talk about him. But he has a famous quote, which is, "When you have a truly creative idea, you're now a minority of one, because you're the only person who has that idea. So you're completely alone, and the odds of it being accepted by everybody is basically zero, right? You're gonna have to persist through failure in order to spread the idea." And it is risky, and people have limited time in their lives, and they have other priorities, and maybe their idea might not work anyway, so like, and it's just kind of the sad thing. Like, just like most maybe I shouldn't be going too far down the biological evolution metaphor, but just like most mutations just die out, right? They're not necessarily helpful. Like if you have a genetic mutation, you might not pass it on for one. You might not have kids. It might not be helpful, and it might just not last. Most ideas don't last. I once heard, I'm not sure who said it. I'm sorry, I'm reaching for quotes now. That's a little silly, but it's an evolutionary biology quote where it's not that God rolls dice about our lives, is that we are the dice.
Yes.
You
That's
know?
so good.
And
Yes.
that's sad. It's I mean, I don't mean sad like I because I know it's true, but we wish we were special, right? We wish that
Yeah.
our idea was just gonna make it because we're the main character of the story. And
Because we're onto quotes, I have to share the quote of one of my favorite painters, Odd Nerdrum. He says, I wasn't born to be entertained. I was born to be recognized."
Mm,
So I think this is one of the deepest longings in every human,
yeah.
that we live in a world of great distraction. So I wasn't born to be entertained, but I was born to be recognized. But that's what our heart really longs for, that feeling that I did something meaningful with my life. I made a difference.
Yeah, one of the things that our culture of consumption of mass media does is it makes the creative class smaller and the
Mhm.
imitative class bigger.
Yes.
And so it makes, from like a spread of ideas perspective, it makes the spread more efficient
Yeah.
because the ideas that are that are able to get through get passed really quickly.
Yes.
But fewer and fewer and fewer of us get to make our own ideas,
Yes.
unfortunately.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sorry for over explaining because I know you know that.
No, but thanks for explaining it, because it really helps those who may not be thinking this way to really have a good perspective on on the topic.
Yeah, I mean, the mass media creates homogeneity. And so homogeneity means fewer opportunities to be creative.
Hmm.
It might mean that the small group of people who control what's being shared, they get to be ultra creative because whatever they do is going to get to everybody. Um, but many of us are kind of stuck imitating,
Yeah.
and I like to think that in my psychology work, that's the area of my life where I never need to imitate. Of course, if someone has a good idea, I will borrow it or I'll mix and match, remix people's ideas. But I imitate in most areas of my life, like we all do.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
but
you're supposed to copy the masters in the beginning.
but as a
That's like the
psychologist, I don't, or I build on what's come before, but I always want to go out into the unknown. So I think I hope that everybody can have one area of their life that they don't imitate.
yes, yes,
And
totally.
when I teach, because I teach undergraduate psychology of creativity, I love teaching it. And a lot of the misconception that I hear about with creativity is essentially that it's arts engagement, right? Like,
Yes,
um,
yes.
but of course, if you're imitating something, there's nothing wrong with it because you need to imitate before
Hmm.
you can contribute
Creed.
something
Yeah.
new. But if you're only imitating, you're actually not you're not creating. You
Yes.
know, you might be doing a lot of good things. You might be relaxing. You might be building community. All those are good too. It's not like that's bad. But being creative means going beyond what is already known.
And I think that that happens when you're able to translate that learning with who you really are. So keeping your perhaps limitations in mind and working with that. Like, I might have a teacher who gives me wonderful vocal lessons, but her voice quality might be very different than mine. Her pitch might be different. So I it would not be wise for me to copy, and a lot of people do that. They imitate the teachers and they ruin their own voices.
Wow.
They sing at a pitch which is way higher than the pitch that's natural to them.
Yeah.
And this is just with the default sort of thing of just copying. And so when you want to really learn something, you still do have to interpret it from your lens. That's the only way you can really learn even that aspect of imitating or
Yeah, I
copying.
see what you mean. You have to make it yours.
Yeah.
I think good education is creative education, basically. It's
Yeah.
just so hard to do that in a big classroom.
Yes. Yes.
You know?
I mean, it's almost impossible
Yeah, it
because
takes
there's
very
no way you
targeted.
can individualize. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're working with only a few students or just one student, it's much
Yeah.
easier to help them.
Yes. Hmm.
For example, think about what would work for them in the discipline.
Yes.
Like with my doc students, I'm able to talk about, well, what project would you want to take on? Like, and why
Yeah.
is that the right one for you? But when I'm teaching 30 or 90 or whatever in a lecture hall, there's no way that that can really happen.
Yeah.
You know?
And I also think that this should not be expected that the teachers or that this awareness should come from the outside. This is an internal awareness that every person who wishes to learn, it's important for them to break that up. And if there's self awareness, I think it wouldn't be a problem for them. It's those who are living in the world of the ready made that everything just has to come from the outside. And the information on that topic can come from the outside, but the processing has to happen from one's own individual source.
I think you'll like this metaphor. It's from Plato's Theaetetus, which is maybe you've read it, where it's where the Socratic teaching method was first written. And so in this text, Socrates is teaching his method of teaching. He's explaining why he teaches the way he teaches, and he says teachers are like midwives. We don't give the mother the baby; they have to create the baby and birth the baby.
Yes.
We
Yes.
midwife it out of them. And
Yes.
Socrates then famously says his mother was a midwife. And that's how he got his ideas, which is kind of a cool thing. And he's saying, well, that's why when I'm teaching, I'm holding space. I'm not coming up with anything. You're coming up with it. I'm trying to midwife it out of you.
Mhm.
So, like, I might give hopefully a well-timed question, like to push your thinking, or I might give you some information or send you out to gather information that you need, like similar to a midwife telling a pregnant mother they need nutrition or something like that. Provide the raw material, but they do the construction. They do the actual gestation of the ideas. I find that metaphor beautiful, and when I remember that I'm the midwife, not the mother, in the classroom, that's when I feel my teaching is at its best. My students are the ones giving birth. I'm just the one helping them along. That even in a giant lecture hall, when I keep that in mind, I still feel more generous, and I think it
Mhm.
still helps.
I'm curious about the two different ways of approaches, which is one is the practitioner approach, the one who creates, and the one who studies what is being created. So that's like the academic. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the great things about Ed Psych is because we teach at the university and we also study education, we have kind of a unique intertwining. So I can speak from a research perspective about learning and teaching, speak as a scholar, and then I'm able to bring in these anecdotes in a way that not every discipline can.
Mhm.
Like if I studied fruit flies or something, I wouldn't be able to say like when I was a fruit fly, I wouldn't. But there's actually a double-edged sword to this because then, as an educational psychologist, you end up with everybody in the world telling you what they think about education because they've all been students, right? And I think sometimes our expertise gets downplayed because everyone has had the experience of being in school. They all have an idea about how to improve it or how education could work. And so then, because of this, I try to be careful. I try to be careful to say when I'm speaking as a scholar and when I'm speaking from my own experience because I want to keep those two things nice and separate. Because I think it's a bad habit to use our own experience to really drive the argument. Our anecdote should be brought in based on what we found. but we don't want, oh, this is how I like to teach, so I'm just going to argue that this teaching method is
Yeah.
best.
Yeah.
That I think is,
Mm.
if somebody was doing that in medicine, it would be bad, right? Oh, well, this is what I want to do anyway, so I'm going to make science that says I should do it. So in ed psych, we do have to be careful. Like, our own natural inclinations toward teaching shouldn't drive the types of teaching processes we believe are best. The data should drive that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's what's required. Can you respond to that?
yeah.
And not just have your own fixed idea.
But of course, I am
Do it
also an
makes-
educator because I do
Yeah.
also teach. So I try to keep that loop healthy. Let my research feed my mentorship and feed my teaching, and also let my mentorship and teaching feed the research. Like, let it inspire me, but not let it drive the findings.
Right. You've studied professional actors.
I have.
What did you find interesting in the way that they think and process things? What makes this different?
This project was really wonderful. I should shout out my amazing collaborator, Mike Doherty, on that. He's an actor, and he was able to help us collect data through the stage and screen unions in the U.S. and Canada too, all of North America. So we collected data through, it's called Actors Equity for stage actor, and SAG-AFTRA, which is the union for screen actors. Probably I maybe I'm over explaining. But because we collected data through that, we actually have, and we collected and we still have, the largest ever sample of professional actors ever psychologically studied. And so we gave a whole bunch of measures. We did a bunch of personality stuff, really interesting motivational measures, and we also gave cognitive measures, divergent thinking, and also several analogical reasoning tasks. And so we got a sense, or we tried to, not just the way these actors think of themselves, like the way they report their personality, but also how they think about problems. And that was really a wonderful project. It's been it was fruitful. It's been a lot of, or a handful of papers. The data are all publicly available and has been downloaded a lot. So I hope people are out there using it somewhere, maybe. But yeah, they're fascinating people, the actors.
Cool.
I hope I explained enough. The
Yes,
process was
and
really fun.
since we'll also share in the links, your paper, and so those who really want to go and check that out in detail, they can definitely do that.
Yeah, maybe one fun finding is that we expected the actors, because we had 3 samples. We had the big professional actor sample, but we also had undergraduate acting majors, and we had adults who had never acted. So we were able to triangulate the differences. So, like, how are the pros different than the students versus different than the non-actors? And I think going in, I was a little naive in terms of thinking that the professional actors would be mostly happy people. But their psychological profiles were, there was a lot more distress. They seemed like people had really gone through difficult times. And I think it makes sense. It's a hard profession to live in. And the student actors were a lot more of what I thought of as a stereotype as a non-actor. A lot more of the high extroversion, high openness, excited about the world. There's enthusiasm measures we gave, high enthusiasm. But the pros were different. They were more withdrawn and more volatile. Their thinking was different, but the non-actors and the students' thinking was more similar. So I hope I'm making sense.
That's very true. You are completely, because I belong to the Bollywood music industry, and what you said is absolutely bang on, because that is what happens, and that has been my observation completely. So I'm not sure why that happens, but that happens.
It's sad how difficult the creative life is, and I think people they get put through the ringer, especially in the arts. And I guess maybe I came out of that project. Yeah, I don't know if I'm saying this the right way, but I kind of ended up with a conceptualization of high creative adults, especially in the arts, as almost like someone who sacrifices themselves for the greater good. Like they're
Yeah.
willing to go off the map, find something new and bring it back for the rest of us. They're willing to explore untrodden territories of the human experience and share it with the rest of us. But it's hard on them. The
It's hard, and it's something they embark on completely by themselves in the beginning, because
Mhm.
there is no validation in the beginning. There's
Yeah.
no acceptance till they really master the whole, all the dimensions, and they're fully ready to present. That's the time when it's the ta-da moment that everybody is open
Yeah.
to seeing them and will clap for them. But the journey is very lonely. That the time when you're sharpening, you're creating, you're making. And at that time, there's no validation. And so it's pretty scary, and you feel very isolated when it's like walking in that dark tunnel till you reach the end of the tunnel.
I can imagine it.
And
A lot of
then it's suddenly there's a lot of light, but that the journey is hard.
It's one of the reasons at the beginning of this talk I wanted to be honest about going into academia, in part because I couldn't handle the risk of the arts. um, I don't know if that lifestyle would work for me. I think
Mhm.
I'm already a little too neurotic, and that would probably send me over the edge, to tell you the truth. And so academia has been a safer. It's still a little risky compared to some other. Like I could have been an accountant, but it was the right amount of risk and reward for me. I think it would be an amazing to succeed in an industry like the one that you did, and I think such it's such a bigger accomplishment in a way, because it is so much less likely to success is less likely. Um, but geez, I chose psychology because it had just the right amount of risk that I could still handle it, and I would still get to be creative, at least a little.
Yeah, I think I think you nailed the point, because it's exactly what you can handle. What you feel is you know is a place where you can get into the state of flow, where you can relax, bring the most meaning, and really be at your best. And I think when people can find that, uh, then just creativity happens. It emerges. So
I'm glad you brought
yeah.
up flow. We just finished a study of painters and flow. So we put on a 5-day painting retreat where participants stayed at the painting retreat and painted all day, every day, and we collected data with them multiple times. Paper hasn't even been submitted yet, but we're finishing it up. So that's been
Uh-huh.
what I've been thinking about this week. Many will argue, and I think I agree with this now, looking at the data, that flow is really the birth, or the beginning, the underlying factor of all intrinsic motivation. It's if creativity just feels good, then that's what intrinsic motivation is. It has to feel good. Otherwise, why would you persist through failure?
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And so I do like to think that I can get in the flow with my work. I like to think that I support my students doing it, but it is hard. Um, yeah, when I teach it, this is a very silly metaphor. I hope you don't think I'm stupid for saying this, but when I teach about flow to undergrads, they love this metaphor. You can tell me whether you think it's bad. But I say flow is a way to make creativity feel good. So people are biologically designed to enter flow, and therefore our nature, it rewards us for being creative. Otherwise, as a species, we would stagnate.
Mhm.
Um,
Totally.
and I make the metaphor of it's like an orgasm. You know,
Yeah,
an orgasm is a natural occurrence that motivates you to have kids.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Otherwise, if people couldn't have orgasms, we'd probably have a lot less humans. So if
yeah.
we didn't have flow, we'd have a lot fewer ideas. And if we didn't have orgasm, we'd have a lot fewer people. So I think flow and orgasms go together. They serve a metaphorically similar function in the human experience.
Mhm.
I hope that doesn't sound too strange.
Yes.
But I'll tell you, the undergrads remember
It's the
that.
first time I'm hearing that, but I guess I'd have to admit it's true.
I thought it up while I was teaching. I haven't ever published that, but I think it really makes a 21-year-old remember what a flow state.
Yes, for sure. Uh, Dennis, it's been so wonderful speaking with you. I think we could just keep going. So basically, there was actually just maybe one question which if, because, people love to have something that they could take away. So if you could hand every practitioner in our audience one practical habit drawn from what your research has shown about how original ideas actually form, what would that be?
You know what I would say? I thought about this deeply because I get this in class too, where students will take my class because they want to be more creative themselves. And the tip that I say is to work on your craft every single day. Like I don't think there's any other shortcut. Like it's not like,
Yeah.
oh, and
Yeah.
meditate beforehand or
Mm.
use psychedelics or all the
Yeah.
things that the students are expecting me to say. The thing is, if you work every day and you actually make something every day. Like for me, it's writing or analysis. I'm writing every day. Like if you're not working every day, what happens is people will only work when they're in a particular mood.
Yeah.
And then their work reflects that mood. So their work becomes homogenous. But if you work every single day, then your natural mood variations and your natural experiential variations, the things that are on your mind happening in your day, create natural variance and diversity among your ideas. So you can't help but be different than who you were yesterday. You can't help.
I think that's such good piece of advice because that really is what could possibly lead you eventually to the flow state. If your body doesn't have muscle memory, if you just haven't done the work, there's no way that you could really do anything meaningful.
You've got to get
And
the reps in.
Yeah.
And so whenever I teach, the students are often expecting a shortcut,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't even mean that as a bad thing. Like there's going to be a
I know.
magic key. Like you'll be creative if you X, Y, and Z. And, it's like you just can't be, right? You've got to climb to the edge of the tree of knowledge in order to become a new twig. You've got to really get there. And I think the argument about natural mood variation being what drives idea diversity within a person, I think is a really nice argument. Like it's part of the argument of why people with mood swings can show greater flexibility in their thinking but only if they work every day. Otherwise, what happens? They only work when they're up, and then they just lay around when they're down, and then all their ideas are the same. So, So if you work through your ups and downs, what happens is you have the ideas that happen when you're down, the ideas that happens when you're up. Your voice has some different texture to it, and you actually are able to do something that's new because you can't help but be new because you're a living being.
Yes.
But if you don't work every day, you don't see it. You don't see that.
You just don't have access to that area until you haven't built it.
Here's another metaphor I make about creative work to the students when they complain. Like I'll say to my grad students, like, well, you got to keep writing over winter break or something. And they'll be like, well, when do we, and I'm like, well, think about your creative mind as like a human that you're taking care of, or an animal or a plant, like a living creature. Like if you had a child, you can't stop taking care of them, right? If you have a dog, you can't stop walking them or feeding them just because you're off, right? So your creative mind, you yourself are a living being, and cultivating your own creativity means you're caring for yourself, and you can't stop it. That doesn't mean you never ever take breaks or you don't rest or whatever. I don't mean that, but it's like you can't take periods away and let that part of you starve. Otherwise, you've got to completely rehab it when you come back.
Exactly. Then you pay a very big price for that.
You really do.
Just, yeah, that disconnect, it's like just reinventing the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it has so many consequences that you lose confidence in yourself. There's so much of bitterness, regret. And whereas if you just kept it going, it wouldn't be
It's
the
like a
case.
living thing that needs to grow.
Yes.
So if
Yes.
it atrophies, many of the things that we recommend people in psych or ed psych, it's a little like physical therapy or exercise science. Like you can't stop it. We don't have take this pill and then you'll be good forever. Like if you want to be strong, I mean, you could take a rest day, but you've got to exercise. It's the same thing if you want to be creative. And I completely agree with you.
It's a way of life. It's an approach to life.
Yeah, it's a habit. It's a habit.
It's a habit. Yeah.
But a habit is something that you can strengthen or weaken. And I'm completely in agreement with you. So it's like if we go back to the kind of quant psych thing, like how does somebody move along that dimension if they want to? They move through the force of their own effort, through that habit.
Yes, I think that's really the most powerful sort of reinforcing thought, because we kind of ignore that, but really that's the most essential.
Yeah.
So the last question for the day, Dennis, you measure creativity for a living. After all of it, do you find the work has made creativity feel more mysterious to you or less?
This was an easy answer to think. It was an easy answer to think up. Absolutely more mysterious, not less. I had a quote that came to mind. I know we've been doing a lot of quotes. Both you and I love quotes. I believe it's an Aristotle quote that the bigger the island of knowledge, the longer the coastline of wonder. Kind of a pretty one. That one's always spoken to me in terms of being a scientist, that the more we know we don't know. And my motivation, or the thing that's always hooked me, is to try to understand the human mental universe. And I know that I know a lot more now than I did 18 years ago when I started working in that ed psych lab, like the story I told in the very beginning, when I knew next to nothing, But that knowledge that has grown has only created more questions, right?
Yeah.
It's like in the island metaphor, anywhere the land touches the water, you have an unknown, right? And so I've certainly gotten less sure as I've gone. And I think when I teach, if I make people less sure, I feel that I've done my job. At least that's usually a sign that their knowledge is growing, because they come up with more questions, more unknowns that they can actually identify. It's common in grad school that at the very beginning, folks aren't necessarily thinking of new research questions because they're not sure what they don't know yet. They have this idea, they have this belief, but they're not used to challenging themselves in the way that you need to move science forward. And it's like they're living in the middle of their island. They're not looking out onto the ocean of the unknown. And so I absolutely have way more questions now, way less certainty now than I ever have.
No, thank you so much for this beautiful concluding thought, because I think it's what the reality is of things, and we should embrace and see that.
I hope this
it's a constant movement.
It really is. I hope this episode's not too boring for people.
No, in fact, I'll share with you honestly that I wasn't sure what to expect, because this is not particularly my favorite area, but you changed that for me. because you brought so much of energy and so much of clarity to the topic that I have really enjoyed this conversation. And thank you so much for the absolutely fabulous energy that you possess, the passion and the interest that you bring to your work. It's inspiring, and I think people are going to love this conversation. Thank you
That's
so
so nice.
much.
Yeah, thanks for saying it. I know people think, I don't know about who people are, but sometimes they see psychometrically oriented researchers they must love tests. It's not about the test. It's about what the
Mhm.
test is testing. We want
Yes.
to
Yes.
understand the human mind. And so we build these geometric models based on large data sets with the belief, the hope that we'll be able to uncover what the shape of the mind is and why people are even different from one another in the first place.
Yeah.
Now, do we know? Well, no. I just like the physicists have so many more questions than answers about how the universe was formed and all that. Every time we make a discovery or a finding, or we have something that seems replicated in our world, then there's always behind it. Well, how did that come to be? Well, or where's it going? There's always more unknowns. So I do quant psych because it allows me to build my island of knowledge, uh,
Yeah.
not because I just love testing people. You know.
Exactly. No, and thank you so much for clarifying that. I have a different way of understanding this now. So I think, you've enlightened many of us on a very different way of perceiving
I,
this.
I guess it would be like it's like I imagine back in the day when astronomy was still sort of new. I think in like a couple thousand years ago or something. Like you wake up in the middle of the night and you see your friend like trying to put a stake in the ground to measure to say the location of this star on this day. And okay, well, where's it gonna go the next day? Or where's the sun rising on at this season, and how are we gonna kind of track it? And you say to that friend, well, why are you doing this?
Hmm.
It's not going to help you eat. You're not going to understand the stars. You can't understand the stars. What are they? But then that maybe that person would say, I'm just curious. Or maybe they might say, who knows? In generations, if we do this, if we track the stars'
Yes.
locations, who knows what we might know?
Yes,
Th-
absolutely.
That's how
And
I
thank
feel.
you for, yes, no, thank you for selling this idea to me, because now it really makes sense that this is all the kind of work that has to happen so that we can just know more.
If I can track how people move through these dimensions, if we can understand the motion the way someone's mind moves through psychological space in comparison to others, based on different forces like education or like intrinsic motivation, like you mentioned, based on those forces, we could maybe start predicting where we think they're going to go. We could
Hmm.
test whether that prediction is right, and we could start understanding how strong those forces even are. Like instead of just talking about it,
Hmm.
we could
Yeah.
start building like a full formalized understanding of the mind in the way that, for example, I know we're building on this metaphor the physicists have for the shape of a galaxy or something like that. Why do we need to know that we live in a spiral galaxy? I guess we don't need to know, but I want to
Hmm.
know. You know, why do we need to know the way human creativity works and its shape and its nature and how people move into it and through it? Well, maybe we don't need to know, but I really want to know.
Yeah. Yeah. But thank you so much, Dennis. Your passion is infectious. And thank you so much for the wonderful energy that you've given our talk today. I truly appreciate
But
it. It's
thank
been
you for being welcoming.
wonderful.
I'm so honored, and I'm just happy to have gotten to chat